Peter Forsberg was as tough as it got when it came to play the game.
He was not only a fantastically skilled player, but he was tough as can be, probably to the detriment of his career because he was often injured because of the way he played. But he would always put himself in harm's way if he could make a play that would help his team.
Not many players in the game of hockey could combine the toughness, the physicality, and the pure skill, and Peter Forsberg certainly had all three.
Forsberg was terrific and a great player to watch, and I'm sure if you played with him, you really appreciated his ability.
He was incredible. He was the one guy that every team had to find a way to stop Peter Forsberg, and it freed up ice for everybody else. One guy couldn't contain him, so somebody else would have to come and always leave somebody open, and he had the vision that he could make any play all over the ice.
The lore for so many generations was that European hockey players aren't tough. Peter Forsberg was a rock.
The Swedes they're tough players. They show it in a very different way, and he was a leader in that regard. In fact, I think he enjoyed the game in the trenches and playing the game in the corners and winning battles as much as he did scoring goals.
When Peter was playing his best game, to me, he was unstoppable.
He didn't play an easy game. He played a full ice game, physical, and that had a lot to do with him maybe not playing as long as he possibly could have.
You know, sometimes, like Peter, you don't have to play that physical. And he says, nah, he says, I like it.
Talk about a fierce competitor. You talk about a guy that I think still has a little grudge on his shoulder to this day. But that's what made him, and I have the utmost respect for him.
Not for injury, Peter Forsberg truly would have put up magnificent numbers. And even without those magnificent numbers, he's in the Hockey Hall of Fame. That speaks volumes of what type of player he was.
The question sounds simple. Who was the hardest player to stop? No music, no dramatic build, just a quiet interview room and a few seconds of silence that feel longer than they should. One player leans back, another looks down at the table. A veteran defenseman exhales, not like he's searching for a name, but like he already knows it. And then it comes. Forsberg, not shouted, not hyped, just said, like a fact everyone in the room already understood. Because when NHL players talk about Peter Forsberg, the conversation changes. The pace slows down. The tone shifts. You don't hear bragging, you hear memories. Before we go any further, if you're a real hockey fan who appreciates stories told by the players themselves, take a second to like and subscribe. These videos take serious research, real interviews, and hours of editing to get right. And it tells me you want more legacy stories told the right way. Now here's what's interesting. When reporters asked about Wayne Gretzky, players talked about genius. When they mentioned Mario Lemieux, they talked about size and skill. But when Forsberg's name came up, something different happened. Players didn't start with stats. Even though he won the Hart Trophy in 2003, led the playoffs in scoring multiple times, and put up one of the highest points per game averages of his era. They didn't talk about numbers first. They paused, almost like they were remembering what it felt like to play against him. A defenseman once described it this way. You'd line him up along the boards thinking you had leverage, and somehow you'd be the one losing balance. A forward said you could hit him clean, square, on textbook, and the puck would still stay on his stick. And that's where this story really begins. Because the real question isn't how good Peter Forsberg was. The real question is why so many NHL players, rivals, teammates, even Hall of Famers, hesitate for a split second before saying his name. And what they say next might surprise you. If you ask fans about Peter Forsberg, the answers usually sound the same. They remember the Olympic shootout move in 1994. The slow glide, the one-handed finish that froze an entire arena. They remember the Avalanche highlights, the silky hands, the vision, the points stacking up during deep playoff runs. To most viewers, Forsberg looked like pure finesse, a European playmaker who made the game look easy. But inside NHL locker rooms, the memories hit different. Players don't start with highlight reels. They start with contact. They remember trying to separate him from the puck and realizing almost immediately that the usual rules didn't apply. At just over 6 feet tall, he wasn't the biggest center of his era. Yet defenders constantly talked about how impossible he was to knock off balance. That's not exaggeration. During his peak seasons with Colorado, Forsberg consistently ranked among league leaders in puck possession metrics long before analytics became mainstream, and his 1.25 career points per game average remains one of the highest in NHL history for players with over 700 games. But numbers don't explain the myth, because what players describe isn't just skill, It's resistance. They talk about reverse hits that turn defenders into passengers. They talk about strength that didn't look explosive until you felt it firsthand. And they talk about something else, a kind of controlled chaos. He could take punishment along the boards, absorb it, and somehow turn it into an offensive advantage. That's the part fans rarely see. From the outside, Forsberg looked smooth. Inside the game, he felt relentless. And maybe that's why NHL players speak about him differently than other superstars. Gretzky changed how players thought. Lemieux changed how they defended size and skill. But Forsberg forced opponents into a strange middle ground. He played with the hands of a finesse center and the physical presence of a power forward. So here's the real question that this video is chasing. Why do so many players, from elite defensemen to veteran enforcers, describe the same uneasy feeling when his name comes up? Because the deeper you go into their stories, the less this feels like admiration, and the more it sounds like survival. Ask NHL players about their first shift against Peter Forsberg, and you'll notice something interesting. The story almost always starts with confidence. They thought they knew what they were facing. A skilled European center, smooth hands, high hockey IQ, someone you respected, sure, but someone you believed you could handle physically if you closed the gap fast enough. And then the puck dropped. One veteran defenseman once described lining him up along the boards early in a game, expecting the usual outcome. Shoulder through the chest, or a puck comes loose, play moves the other way. Instead, Forsberg absorbed the hit, rolled off contact, and skated away with the puck still glued to his stick. No panic, no rush, just control. That was the moment everything changed, because Forsberg didn't look intimidating in warm-ups. He wasn't the loudest voice on the ice, and he didn't carry himself like a traditional power forward. But, shift by shift, players realized they were dealing with something different. A center who could out-muscle defensemen while reading the ice 2 steps ahead. During his peak Avalanche seasons in the early 2000s, opponents talked openly about how exhausting it was just trying to separate him from possession. It wasn't one big hit that wore you down. It was the constant battle for leverage, on the way he used his edges and lower body strength to stay upright, even under heavy pressure. And that's the emotional turning point players remember. Not a goal, not a highlight, but the first time they leaned into him and realized this wasn't a normal matchup. Because once that realization hit, the game plan changed. And what happened next forced entire teams to rethink how you even defended a player like Peter Forsberg.
I tried everything, and I'm happy with my career, and I wouldn't change my career with that many people. I think I had a good run, and I got to win a lot of things before I was 30, so I'm happy.
When I think of Peter Forsberg, I think the ultimate competitor. He was a warrior on the ice. We knew his skill, his vision, playmaking ability was tops in the league, but physically, you couldn't outmatch him. He was so strong in that puck. That's what made him so tough to play against. Peter's demeanor, he was quiet, great guy to be around, never took himself serious, very humble man, just a great teammate to be around. But once he got on the ice, you could see it in his eyes when he wanted to do something out there. He was a totally different guy, very intense, very focused. Peter was a guy that when he was feeling it and he wanted to take the game over, he did that both with his hockey sense and his physical nature.
Here comes Forsberg. Right in, he scores!
Peter played through a lot of pain. Whatever he could do to get on the ice, he would do. And he wouldn't make excuses. Peter just went out there and played as hard as he could and for the most part, dominated a lot of the games.
Here's on Forsberg, shot, oh, is he red hot?
Peter was remarkable in that run. And the best memory I have of that one is he was in the Stanley Cup Finals game 2. Florida played remarkably well. Getting to that point, we're shutting down a lot of top guys, and that was the talk. And Peter really set the tone for our entire club. He was so good that night.
Forsberg, 3 goals. Mercy.
That really kind of, I won't say cemented the championship, but really gave us that confidence going into Florida.
I'm out there to win, and it doesn't matter if you do good personally. If you lose the game, it's worth nothing.
There are great players you try to imitate, and then there are players who quietly force you to change the way you play. Peter Forsberg belonged to the second category. It wasn't just skill. Plenty of NHL stars had elite hands or vision. What made Forsberg different was the way he blended finesse with physical leverage. Watch closely, and you'll notice it immediately, his edge control under pressure. So defenders would close in, expecting to angle him off, and somehow he'd pivot through contact without losing balance. That wasn't luck. It was lower body strength, timing, and an awareness of space that felt almost unfair. Then there were the reverse hits. Opponents came in expecting to deliver punishment, only to find themselves knocked off stride instead. It didn't happen once or twice. It became part of his identity. Coaches around the league started warning young defensemen not to overcommit physically because Forsberg turned aggression into opportunity. That's a subtle tactical shift, but it mattered. Players adjusted their gap control, their angles, even how they approached board battles. And maybe the most underrated part of his game was vision under chaos. In heavy traffic, sticks everywhere, bodies colliding. He could slow the play down mentally while everything else sped up. That's how he produced elite offense despite constant physical attention, including a 106-point Hart Trophy season in 2002 to 2003, one of the most dominant performances of the post-lockout era. But here's the thing, you couldn't just teach someone to play like Forsberg. Teammates could study him, opponents could prepare for him, yet year after year, players admitted the same reality. You could adjust your tactics, but you couldn't replicate the style itself. And as more teams started redesigning defensive systems just to contain him, the question shifted from how do you stop him to something even more uncomfortable. What if stopping him was never really possible? Hockey players don't use the word fear, not in interviews, not in locker rooms, and definitely not about another opponent. The culture of the NHL doesn't allow it. Toughness is expected. Respect is earned quietly. And vulnerability? That usually stays behind closed doors. But years after retirement, when the pressure fades and the rivalries cool off, the stories start to sound a little different. Former defensemen talk about the preparation meetings before facing Colorado, how coaches would circle Forsberg's name on the whiteboard and remind everyone that the usual physical game plan didn't always work. Enforcers who built careers on intimidation admitted they had to rethink how they approached him, not because he was loud or aggressive, but because he never backed down from contact and somehow still controlled the play. Nobody called him scary, but listen closely to how they describe those matchups. They talk about shorter shifts. They talk about conserving energy just to handle one cycle along the boards. They talk about the mental fatigue, knowing that one small mistake could turn into a scoring chance because of his elite vision and puck protection. During his peak Avalanche years, Forsberg wasn't just producing offense. He was dictating the pace of entire games. Opponents prepared for him the way teams prepare for elite power forwards. Yet he still averaged over a point per game across his career, a level of consistency that forced defenders into uncomfortable decisions every time he stepped onto the ice. And here's the part players admit quietly now. You didn't feel relief when you shut him down for a shift. You felt lucky. That's the locker room reality fans rarely hear, because publicly it was always respect. Privately, and it was survival. You didn't defend Forsberg, you survived shifts against him. And once that mindset took hold across the league, something subtle changed. Teams stopped asking how to dominate him physically and started asking a much harder question. What happens when a player turns your own strengths against you? When fans think about dominance in the NHL, they usually picture speed, explosive first steps, breakaway rushes, highlight reel acceleration. But ask players who shared the ice with Peter Forsberg, and they'll tell you something different. He didn't always look like the fastest skater out there. And that's exactly what made him dangerous. Teammates often described his game as calm inside chaos. While everyone else reacted to pressure, Forsberg seemed to anticipate it. You'd see defenders collapse toward him, sticks reaching, bodies closing the gap. And instead of rushing a pass or forcing a shot, he'd slow everything down. A half-second delay, a subtle shift in body position. Then suddenly, the ice opened up in a way nobody else saw coming. Freeze the frame during one of his offensive zone cycles, and you'll notice something almost analytical about it. His head stays up. His edges stay engaged. He's not just protecting the puck. He's reading options 2 or 3 steps ahead. That's how he built a reputation as one of the smartest playmakers of his generation, finishing his career with over 600 assists despite constant physical attention from opposing teams. Players didn't describe this as speed. They described it as timing. One former teammate said it felt like Forsberg controlled the tempo of entire shifts without ever looking rushed. so opponents would accelerate to close space. And somehow he'd make the game feel slower for everyone else. That's not something you coach. That's awareness, instinct, and a level of hockey IQ that turns pressure into opportunity. And here's the twist most fans don't realize. His intelligence made his physical game even harder to defend. Because when you can't predict where a player is going next, every hit becomes a gamble. Commit too early and you're out of position. Hesitate, and he's already creating a passing lane. So the real advantage wasn't speed or strength alone. It was the way he blended both with a mind that processed the ice like a chessboard. And once players realized they weren't just chasing a puck, but trying to outthink someone who was already a move ahead. The matchup stopped feeling like a battle of skill. Fun, it started feeling like a trap. The regular season is where reputations grow. The playoffs are where they either crack or become permanent. And during the Colorado Avalanche era, Peter Forsberg turned into something opponents still talk about with a different kind of tone. Not just respect, but disbelief. Because playoff Forsberg didn't feel like the same player you prepared for in October. Opponents describe those series as exhausting battles, not just because of his production, though the numbers back it up. Across his postseason career, he averaged well over a point per game and played a massive role in Colorado's 2001 Stanley Cup run, where his physical play and elite vision made him nearly impossible to contain along the boards. But what rivals remember most isn't the stats, it's the pain tolerance. There were nights when he clearly wasn't at full strength, dealing with ankle and foot issues that would have sidelined most players. And yet he kept showing up in high-pressure moments. Defensemen talk about finishing checks late in games, expecting fatigue to slow him down, only to realize he was still driving possession like it was the opening shift. And here's what made it even more unsettling. He didn't lead with speeches. You won't find many clips of Forsberg yelling on the bench or demanding attention in the media. His leadership was quieter, almost stubborn. Teammates have said the message was simple. If he was willing to battle through contact every shift, nobody else had an excuse to take one off. That's how the Avalanche identity formed during those years. Not loud, not flashy, just relentless. They'd shut down one line, slow the tempo, think they finally had control. And then Forsberg would extend a shift, grind along the boards, and suddenly the momentum flipped. The bench energy changed without a single word being said. That's when respect started turning into legend. Because in the playoffs, skill alone doesn't define you. Pain, pressure, and presence do. And the deeper those series went, the more players realized they weren't just facing a talented center anymore. They were facing a mindset that refused to break no matter how physical the game became. Listen closely to how different players describe Peter Forsberg, and something unusual starts to happen. The words begin to overlap. Even when the perspectives couldn't be more different. Teammates talk about trust. They describe a center who could hold possession long enough for everyone else to get into position. Someone who made the game feel calmer even when the pressure was building. Avalanche players from that era often said the same thing. When Forsberg had the puck down low, you didn't panic. You knew something was about to open up. Rivals tell a different kind of story, but the language sounds strangely familiar. Defensemen remember leaning into him along the boards, expecting the puck to come free. They talk about shifts where every hit felt clean, every angle looked right, yet he still skated away with control. That's where phrases like unstoppable and impossible to knock off the puck started appearing in interviews years later, not as hype, but as a quiet admission of how frustrating those matchups felt in real time. And the numbers back up why those descriptions stuck. During his prime seasons with Colorado, Forsberg consistently ranked among the league's top possession drivers, producing elite offense while absorbing heavy physical attention. His career points per game rate sits among the best of his era, a reminder that dominance wasn't just visual, it was measurable. But here's the part that makes this section different. Teammates admired him because he elevated their play. Rivals respected him because they couldn't fully solve him. Two sides of the same story, reaching the exact same conclusion. Different level. That emotional unity says more than any stat line ever could. Because hockey players rarely agree on greatness. Styles clash, eras change. Yet when Forsberg's name comes up, the gap between admiration and rivalry almost disappears. And when opponents start sounding like former teammates, you know the legacy has crossed into something deeper than competition. The real question now isn't whether he was respected. It's why that respect still sounds so personal. Even decades later. Away from the noise of playoff arenas and board battles, Peter Forsberg felt almost like a different person. No loud headlines, no dramatic sound bites. Just a calm, measured presence that teammates often described as very Swedish, reserved, thoughtful, and focused more on the game than the spotlight around it. Interviews rarely turned into long speeches. He answered questions directly, sometimes briefly, and then moved on. There was no performance in it. And maybe that's what made the contrast so striking. On the ice, he played through heavy contact, absorbed punishment, and dictated the physical tone of entire series. Off the ice, he carried himself with quiet composure. The kind of personality that didn't chase attention but naturally earned respect. Former teammates have said you didn't need a motivational speech from him. The way he prepared and competed spoke louder than anything he could say in a locker room. That balance, brutal competitiveness during games, calm humility afterward, became part of how players remembered him. Rivals who battled him for years would describe the same thing. The intensity vanished the moment the final horn sounded. No theatrics. Just a handshake, a nod, and a quiet exit down the tunnel. It's easy to overlook moments like that when you're watching highlights. But inside hockey culture, those details matter. They shape how players talk about someone long after the career ends. Because sometimes, the loudest legacy isn't built on noise at all. It's built on consistency. Shift after shift. Season after season, without ever needing to raise your voice. And that's where the story circles back to the question that started it all. The question comes back one last time. Who was the hardest player to stop? This time, the montage moves faster. Different eras, different jerseys, different voices. But the pattern doesn't change. Forsberg. No debates, no rankings, just quiet agreement. Because the deeper you listen to these stories, the clearer something becomes. Players don't just remember what Peter Forsberg did. They remember what it felt like to play against him. The weight of a shift along the boards. The frustration of clean hits that changed nothing. The moment you realized you weren't chasing a highlight, you were chasing control of the game itself. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not just respect from teammates, not just admiration from fans, but a physical memory carried by the players who faced him night after night. A reminder that greatness in hockey isn't always loud. Sometimes it lives in the silence after a name is spoken. The arena fades to empty seats. A single spotlight touches the ice. No music swells. No final argument tries to define where he ranks. Just one last thought left hanging in the air. Peter Forsberg wasn't just a superstar you watched. He was a presence you felt, and a standard players still measure themselves against long after the game ends. And if stories like this matter to you, the real voices, the real memories behind the legends, take a moment to like and subscribe. It genuinely helps keep these deep dive hockey stories alive, and it tells me you want more videos that go beyond highlights and into the legacy players leave behind.